So it's getting to the end of the salmon fishing season, which started about 2 months ago. So I thought I'd go over what I've done to the boat this year, and now that I've had a lot of experience with it, I know what was working for me. Some of these things I've covered in more detail on 3 other videos, one on the 12-volt power system, one on the box for the amateur radio, and the third on the steering mechanism for the Torqeedo motor. Starting at the bow, this year I've got a hard-mounted navigation light, which I use both in foggy weather and then when I go out when it's still dark out in the mornings. And then also new for this year is a forward camera mount, and this is a Sony camera that we've added a little cover to protect it from splashes when bow wakes come over the boat. And it's gotten wet several times also from fish splashes. And this little cover protects the electrical connection for power. And then right behind that is a new cover for the bow, which has been screwed down for the entire season. I don't need to access anything under this cover. And after this I'll have a little short video that will show you what's under this cover. But it's been very successful in keeping quite a bit of water, again, mostly from running into wakes, from entering the boat, and it's been draining to the side. With the bow cover unscrewed, you can see what's under the hood. Just a word about the bow cover. It's a piece of high-density polyethylene that I used a heat gun to form. I put a gutter on this end with a double fold of material, and then I put a bow in it so that it sheds water towards the back and to the outsides, and a couple of little dimples where the cables for the camera and for the running lights run underneath. So underneath that cover is batteries. In the orange box is the 12-volt battery, the lithium, which I talked about more extensively in a separate video on the 12-volt power system. And it's connected to this white cable up to the battery monitor box up on the dashboard. And then the gray boxes are both batteries for the Torqeedo motor. And the way I carry these is that I hold them on a track, which is the orange plate on the bottom. I can swap these batteries by pulling them forward, so they're out of the track, disconnecting the cables, of course, rotating them 180 degrees, and then sliding them back in and reconnecting the cables. And then finally there's a bungee here that keeps them from sliding aft when they're in use. The things that are underneath this cover don't normally need to be accessed except for some kind of maintenance item. This battery doesn't need to be moved to be charged. It can be charged in place. And say the Torqeedo batteries slide forward to get them in and out. And only the battery in use needs to be uncovered. These batteries have a GPS receiver inside of them. And so as long as the one that's active is exposed, then everything's fine. So here's a view of the battery tray with the batteries, of course, removed. It's made out of starboard, which is a type of high-density polyethylene, and it's supposed to be more resilient to water. And if you kind of look underneath it, you see something that's orange, or a bright orange. If you get a little lower here, and that is more of the polyurethane foam that I cast in place in the boat to hold that starboard in place. And actually the underside of the starboard's been routed into a grid pattern, so the foam, when it was mixed and grew in place, had a nice rough surface to adhere to. So that keeps the mounting plate from moving from side to side. And then this orange vertical posts keep it tied in place in the vertical position and forward and back. And then there's kind of a bungee hanging in the middle, which is what keeps the batteries from sliding back out to the back of the boat when the boat's tilted. Torqeedo in the summertime came out with a new bigger battery. The original batteries were 320 watt hours, the new one's 905. So almost 3 times the size. So I got one of those, but they obviously have changed the form factor, and whereas the original batteries had these kind of feet that stuck out, which made it very handy for my my little track system to hold the batteries in place. The new batteries didn't have anything like that, and had these mounting points up higher. But luckily they kept this dimension the same between both sets of batteries, so I was still able to slide it in. And actually, before I move on to this carrier, is that you can see I tied the 2 batteries together with just some links that keep them together, and then when I attach the bungee to keep them from sliding out, I just attach it to one of these 2 pieces of cord. So to get the big battery to mount to the same system, I built a little carrier for it, which again is made out of more starboard. The tracks go over the tops and the 2 sides, and then I used aluminum angle iron to build and flat pieces to build this system to hold it rigidly to the plate, and then added a handle so I can, when I'm in the boat, I can slide it forward. And luckily the cables weren't enough, locations weren't enough different that I didn't have to do any real modifications to how my cables worked. Behind that is my instrumentation panel. 2 new things for this year. One, the black box that used to be where my 12-volt battery was, this Kayak box, now is an electronics box. I have a whole video on what I've done there. And then on the right in the yellow box is where I keep my radio, and then the fish finder like I had last year. One thing a little different than last year, we were only allowed to use 1 rod for fishing, and I'd put in 2 rod holders. It turns out the second rod holder has a good purpose even when I'm not using it for holding a rod. One is when I need to keep my line out of the water, either because I'm working on it or I'm traveling from one place to another. I just use this rod holder as a place to loop the leader around, and then the lure, I have a fitting here on the side, and I just put the hook into that, and it keeps it in place. And then the other use for this rod holder is that when I'm landing a fish, once I've got it in the net, I have it angled so it's very convenient to put the butt end of the rod into that rod holder to get it out of the way while I'm dealing with a fish, trying to get it into the boat. Backing up just a second, as you can kind of see as I kind of go through underneath that cover, there are 2 batteries under there, and I have a philosophy of always having 1 spare battery that I don't plan to use, and but early in the season I actually planned to use at least 2 batteries, so I actually was carrying 3 batteries for part of the year, with the 3rd battery being stored behind the seat as I was doing last year. The other thing new in the cockpit this year, which you can't see a whole lot of, but I added a little ladder made out of polypropylene, which is under the seat, just a couple Velcro straps that hold it in, and then I use some electrical conduit to form a place to put your foot. So if I ever should get dumped, it'll make getting back in the boat considerably easier. And I did actually try that out several times during the warm weather, and it worked out quite well. As we go farther back, I've added an additional rod holder for carrying another rod here by my tackle bag. That was kind of a more convenient spot to be able to work on it while I'm underway. And then, like last year, I've got the net in the same place as before, and then the same mounting for the back camera. So then we've got the same tackle bag as before in the same location, And then behind it's a whole new set of stuff. First off, and I'll take the, is on top is the fish bag I had last year, which works out well. It unfolds, and I can get, this year I had up to a 38-inch fish in there, and fit quite nicely. And then when it's sitting on top of 2 pieces of foam. This one is one that I cast. I'll have a couple short clips showing how I cast this. And it's a cooler for storing ice packs. And then when I was casting it, I also cast it in 2 places for putting tools. In this case, I've got a adjustable painter's boom with a hook on the top, so I can reach either the bow or the stern. Usually it's to get to the motor to pull debris off the prop, but this has worked out very well. This little hook I found online is pretty good at grabbing, oops, I'll get that in frame, pretty good at grabbing materials that are wrapped around the hook, around the prop. And then behind that in orange is another piece of foam, which is just polystyrene. It's two 2-inch pieces that were glued together. And I say I'll pull the bag off so you'll get a better view. And then the last thing in the back, which is still in its folded position, is the antenna for the radio. And this is a 2-meter radio, which is used primarily for running a amateur radio protocol called APRS. So without the tackle, or without the fish bag on top, you can see what's underneath it was hiding. The big white box is a cooler that I cast out of 2-part polyurethane foam. And it's at least 2 inches thick, pretty much all around, and I've found that it keeps ice packs cold for at least below freezing for at least 2 days. Inside is a cavity that was designed specifically for this brand of ice pack, and one reason I chose this brand is because when it's frozen, it has very little expansion in its thickness opposed to the low-end types of ice packs. So it doesn't take it really much. This one is frozen. You can see its thickness is not very much. So this cavity is designed to hold 6 of these ice packs, and I only used 6 early in the season where it was still pretty warm out and I was going long distances. And then the rest of the season I'd cut back to 5, which was enough to take care of the fish that time of year. And then behind the cooler is a piece of foam that's just there to give a fairly level surface and protect all the fittings and lines and cables that are underneath it getting to the back of the boat. So, as I said before, this is just polystyrene foam that's glued together. This coming out of the side is the hose out of the bilge pump, which is back in the bottom of the boat. And this piece of foam just is bolted down with a bolt through the top. And then I put the stopper back in the exhaust for the bilge pump. That's just to prevent water from being siphoned back in. Although I don't really think with this setup was ever going to be a problem, but since I added the stopper, I keep it in. And then finally on the aft end of the boat, it's pretty much exactly the same as last year, except for changes to the steering mechanism, which I documented in a separate video. I've got the Torqeedo motor that's here with lines for pulling it up or keeping it in the down position when you're trying to operate in reverse. I've got my transducer for my fish finder here, which gets a little bit of clutter, a little bit of noise from the prop if you're going fast, but at trolling speeds it still gives a pretty clear image. And then the fairing that I built last year that keeps debris from collecting around this motor shaft. as we're going through the water.